Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The New Norm with Selena Hill on Black Enterprise. Today, I have the privilege to speak with Dr. Yusef Salaam, who's a member of the Exonerated Five, formerly known as the Central Park Five, and author Ibi Zoboi. Together, they co-authored the young adult novel, Punching the Air. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So you two collaborated on this novel, which is about a Black Muslim teen wrongfully sentenced to prison. And the book was actually inspired by real life events that happened in your life, Yusef. As I mentioned earlier, you were part of what was known as the Central Park Five. You and a group of other African-American and Hispanic young boys were wrongfully imprisoned back in 1989 and accused of beating and raping a white woman who was known as the Central Park Jogger. So tell us about this book.
This book is really a great offering, I think, from not only myself, but also Ibi, in that I did go through that experience, but there was so many experiences that were happening around New York in and around that time. And it was easy to talk about it. And it's crazy because this moment right now, it almost seems like we planned it, right? Because, Black Lives Matter is matter. Like everybody's out there around the globe talking about the issues that we've been talking about the issues that are in this book. I often say that I was awakened to the American nightmare. I always wanted the American dream, always hoped for the American dream, and didn't really know what the American reality was until I turned 15 years old. And then not only was I run over by the spike wheels of justice, but my family was run over by the spike wheels of justice as well. And so we wanted to share that story of not just what happens with a young person that goes through the criminal justice system, a system that I call the criminal system of injustice, but what also happens to their families, what happens to community, what happens and what are some of the inroads to prison. We explore all of that in this book.
Ibi, what's your take about, the book? What can readers expect from it?
Well, I come into the equation as a young adult author. I write books for young readers from ages 5 to 18, but Punching the Air is really, as Yusef and I say, is for readers 8 to 80. So a middle schooler can read it, a grandma, grandpa can read it. So in that sense, it's for everyone. And I want young people and all readers alike to go into the story expecting not just a story about criminal injustice or the mass incarceration or the prison industrial complex. This is a story about a boy, first and foremost, about a child. When I met Yusef in college, I wanted to tell his story in my college newspaper, and I met him again as a young adult author, and he was selling his book of poetry. And this is one of the reasons why it's in verse, and we want verse allows readers to go into it and grasp raw emotion. It's just a few words on the page, but you get to the heart of the character, you get to the heart of the story much quicker. So in that sense, we want readers to just understand the emotional turmoil that a boy in his situation would go through and how he finds his voice, finds his passion, finds his hope through art and poetry.
Yusef, why did you think it was important to publish a young adult novel written in this way?
The most beautiful thing about this is that we live in a New York minute. We especially live in a New York minute now, right? And the ability to capture a person's mind needs to happen very quickly. Back in the days, I remember being in the ciphers and hearing, great hip hop artists like Big Daddy Kane, KRS-One, Rakim, Nas, all of these great artists. And you would be in the cipher listening to their audio tape and be like, yo, hold on, rewind that back. Did y'all hear that? And it was that music that was in the message that was important. And there was always a message in the music, and there was beauty in that, right? And so one of the things that we found is that when you pick up this book, first of all, the hardcover is beautiful. The hardcover has texture on it. I mean, it is a work of art in and of itself. And so immediately the book is being judged by the cover, right? And as people look at the book and then begin to open it and really just maybe, flip through some pages, they realize that there's artwork on the pages in the book. They realize that the way that the words are laid out is art. This whole thing is a work of art. This whole thing, it actually allows you to be immersed in the beauty of nature and creation that you see around you, that we really almost for the first time in a long time had the awakening of, especially in this era of COVID-19. We all had to pause for a moment. We all had to recognize, greater forces at play, and sometimes we had to bury loved ones, unfortunately. But I thought that this book being written in this way, was a mastermind. I mean, it was Ibi that really came up with the concept, but it was a mastermind of being able to say, we not only want to talk to young people from 8, but also wiser people all the way to 80 and beyond. But we also want to be able to have the reader look at this work of art and be pulled through it, be completely captivated by it, say to themselves, I'm just going to read chapter 1. And you look up and you are in the middle of the book. Oh man, I got to go to bed. And you say, one more page. And next thing you know, there's people that read this book in one sitting. This is the accolades that we've been receiving, the praise that we've been receiving. This is a really, really well thought out, beautiful offering, I think, from both of us. And I can't wait for the public to get a copy, I can't wait. They're gonna love this. They might want to get 2 copies, right? Because they're gonna want to have one that they just put off to the side, maybe in a safe, in a vault. And then they're gonna want to have the other one that they're gonna want to read and perhaps mark up and perhaps utilize opportunity to have conversation with. That's this book. That's how great this book is.
Ibi, what makes this book such a good, what makes this time such a good time to release this book?
Unfortunately, any time in America would be a good time to release this book. This incident happened to Yusef 30 years ago. I met him 20 years ago, and if I was an author back then, this book would have still been relevant. It would have been relevant in 2012 during Trayvon Martin's murder. So that's the sad part about it. We could put this out 5 years from now, and I wonder how relevant it will be. It's not just that it will be. It's not just that it's relevant. It's how people are going to engage it differently during each year, each season, decade to decade. Interestingly enough, I'm realizing that this book is being compared to Walter Dean Meyer's Monster, and he's a young adult author. And that book was groundbreaking because it was the first one to really get inside the criminal justice system and follow a boy through his trial and through his imprisonment. But it's more about the trial. It's different from Punching the Air. But in 1999 was when it was published, and it was relevant then. And it's been 20 years and we're still talking about this. So, but ultimately right now, there's still Black Lives Matter, right? Where now the conversation has evolved to not just include prison reform, but young people are talking about abolition, prison abolition. It's not just a police brutality needs to stop. It is now defund the police. So the conversation has never disappeared. We've always been experiencing it in our communities, but I think young people are taking it deeper and pushing the conversation.
Yusef, you've been a very vocal advocate for criminal justice reform, prison reform, the abolition of solitary confinement. Do you also align with the prison abolition movement, which Ibi just mentioned?
Most certainly. And I don't necessarily I'm not always vocal about that. But the reality of the matter is that conceptually, I know that things happen over time. And I know that we've been fighting the battle, and there's many of us who've said, you know what, I'm going to join the system to make change and to be a part of something great. And hopefully I can do something positive. And unfortunately, sometimes we've gone into the system and we took our eyes off the prize. You know, we've forgotten what it is that we're doing and why. And I think the most important thing is to utilize all of the great expressions that have been placed out there, you know, things like the spook who sat by the door. It informs us and tells us things about what we can accomplish and what we should be thinking about when we're in these spaces, right? It's not enough to just say to yourself, I'm gonna go and better myself and get a paycheck. It's about bettering community in a way that we've always spoke to, right? We've always been about all of us. There's been a concerted effort to make us about individual, but we've always been about community. It's always been about the we as opposed to the I. And I think when we look at that, you know, it becomes so important, but we can't, as we work for abolition, right? Because the inception of things is what informs us as well about things, right? And so they want us to forget that the prison industrial complex was a outgrowth and a continuation of slavery by another name. They want us to forget that. And so for us to say reform and reform alone without telling the story of the truth is to disrespect the reality of what really is going on, right? Because it really needs to be torn down, just like these monuments to the Confederacy need to be torn down. White supremacy, white male dominance has to be abolished in totality. And one of the beautiful things I think about this time is that even though we've been talking about reform in the past and young people are talking about abolition today, we are seeing an awakening of sorts happening around the globe with the most fearless of the community, the most fearless in society, right? And they've now said, lean in. Enough is enough. Now is the time, not tomorrow, not, you know, yesterday. Now is the time. We have to do all that we can do, because if we've done all that we can do, then we've done our best. But oftentimes there's a lot more that we can do, and then some more as well after that, right? And so I think when we think about prison abolition, that conversation has to happen. Both Ibi and I come from a background where we were both in Hunter College at the same time. And our professor that we often talk about, Professor Dr. Marimba Ani, she was a protege of Dr. John Henry Clark. And one of the things I never forget her saying was, if we, right, and this is the collective we, if we decided tomorrow that their system ceases to exist, tomorrow their system will cease to exist. That's how powerful unity is. But it takes it's an uphill battle to get to unity. I'm often reminded of the words of Harriet Tubman, right? She said, I freed so many slaves and I could have freed so many more had they only realized they were slaves. And so we're working against, right, the technology that has been embedded in our community. That seed of technology has been allowed to grow and fester and causes disunity in all forms and fashion, you know, where this is the time is now.
Ibi, speaking of, Black liberation and just freedom, complete abolition, how do you think, what role does the book play in that fight for liberation and freedom?
You know, Yusef mentioned that we are coming from a similar background, a similar ideology, because we were taking classes in Pan-Africanism, right? And we were having these conversations in college 20 years ago, and that because that was the overall vibe in New York City. And we read books that weren't in mainstream bookstores. We read books that were published by underground Black presses like Africa World Forum and the Third World Press by Hakeem Madabuti out in Chicago. And the authors of these books were typing it out on a typewriter. They were passionate about the information. They weren't, type something here really quick on a MacBook Air and then go Google it really quick. There was so much research and so much love that went into publishing and writing a 700-page tome, back in the day. And that was the power of books for us, right? Now, recently, with all the protests happening in June, there was this movement to black out the New York Times bestseller list, and everybody was buying all these books about racism and all the Black books. I know I had an anthology called Black Enough that made a bestseller list. So in that case, books have that sort of power to start to shift the ideology of a nation. At the same time, it can still be at the surface level, right? Anybody could read Punch in the Air and be like, poor child, close the book, put it away, right? And they move on. But it's not just a book moving us toward liberation. It's not just the job of the books. It's reading the books, is talking to people, is being in community. It is being active in our own various ways. It's engaging with art. Because in Punching the Air, Amal, the character, reads books, but he's also interacting with painters and illustrators, right? Somebody calls him young Basquiat. Basquiat wasn't an author, Basquiat wasn't a poet, Basquiat was a painter. So art, music, books, fashion are all working together for our liberation. And we don't usually think of fashion as liberation. I noticed I had another ID card from Hunter and I was rocking a head wrap just like this 20 years ago. And it was the thing that, with Erykah Badu coming out, it was our way of expressing ourselves. And Yusef, that night, that fateful night in Central Park, you should see his pants. He had like the Africa logo, the red, black, and green, Rasta symbol and all of that. And, just in June, Amazon had red, black, and green flag on their landing page. So it's not just the books, it's everything about our culture working in tandem to shift the aesthetic, right? When you shift the aesthetic, you shift the worldview. When you shift the worldview, you shift the engagement with our local politics and the national politics. So this is a book about art, it's poetry, it's a young adult novel, but it's in conversation with other forms of art that exist today. And there's a part of it when he said he's more Kendrick Lamar than Blueface. So I'm giving shout out to hip hop artists, even Nas and Lauryn Hill, other artists, other writers. So that's part of the conversation.
Yusef, I read that you said writing this book was a bit traumatic. Why was that?
So we're talking about, me realizing that I had to go back and get it. I had to have a Sankofa-like moment, right? And in that moment, there was tremendous pain and suffering because although you see this Yusef today, Yusef had to fall down 9 times and get up 10, like the philosopher Cardi B said, right? we had to have comeback power. We had to have stick-to-itiveness. We had to have the ability to keep our eyes on the vision and on the prize, to be able to say there's going to be the light is the darkest, the darkness. I mean, the day follows the dark, follows the night, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. And I think oftentimes when you've come back into the world without the ability to get help, right? You need to be transitioned in a similar way when POWs come home from war so that they don't immediately feel like they're back in Afghanistan or wherever part of the world just because a car backfired and all of the PTSD that comes and associates with that. But what happened with me was of a greater scale, because I was having these waves of Sankofa happening to my life. One was that I took this experience and I turned on my grit and allowed myself to overcome with the tools that the Creator gave me, right? And then I put all of that behind my back and allowed it to be a stepping stone for me to be able to move in life now without being debilitated. And to reach back into that realm of pain, of uncertainty, of powerlessness was important, but it also was traumatic, and it was necessary, right? Because I had to go back and get it. I had to have that Sankofa moment, because that, you know, my story, just as an example, was not just for me. My story, I often say, is a love story between God and his people, right? I was allowed to be because there was something that I had to give. And that thing that I had to give, I'm still giving. And so now my life is not my life, right? I am a part of the grand design. And I realized that, right? And I had to be able to, like, literally put myself there and understand, oh, God is using me. The Creator is using me. There's the creative force that allowed me to, in a I want to say this as humbly as I can, right? Because my good friend Jimmy Gardner said it. And Jimmy Gardner, another exoneree, he did 27 years in prison. I say he did Mandela time. And Jimmy Gardner said, thank God I don't look like what I've been through. You know, God allows, and the creative forces allow you to be a light in the darkness. Not only from what you see, right? You see, and I'm smiling and I'm happy and I'm like, yeah, you know, just like in the movie Sankofa, right? Written so many years ago, you see the elders and you say, yeah, we did go through that. But look at us, we're resilient people. And not only am I resilient, but you are resilient too. Inside of you is the seed of the mighty oak. And our experience is water that seed and allow that seed and that person to know that they have to be, because the great I am said, be, and we are.
What did you have to go through a process to get to that place of enlightenment and peace? Like, was there a period of time where you felt resentment or anger, or like, did you have any negative emotions when you were going through that very dark period of time that helped lead you to the light?
Oh, was absolutely. There's never total positive. Your positivity, however, has to outweigh the negative, right? There's ups and downs in life, but you have to want to be able to magnify the ups more than the downs. And so for me, there would be times where I would be like, man, I don't know why I'm being put through this. But I would pray, because I knew that there was a greater design. I knew that man plans and God is the best of planners. I knew that, right? But I still would say, why? Like, what am I supposed to do? Why me, right? And then it wasn't until later that I saw the path. But I was the one walking through an uncharted path, knocking down the weeds with my machete. You know what I'm saying? I was charting the path and letting people know how to, because of my experience. But all of that was through blood, sweat, and tears, real tears, you know? And the pain of it was something that, you know, when I would pray, I would always say that prayer is when you talk to God. But I would also couple the prayer with meditation. and I would draw, and I would immerse myself in thought and in vision, you know, and I realized that in those moments, God was talking to me. In those moments, God was giving me the design of the famous poem Footprints. I got you. You all right. You good. You're gonna be all right. And we gonna be all right, right? Because that's just how we are. We take lemons that life gives us and we make lemonade.
Ibi, what social impact do you hope Punching the Air makes?
So, you know, I was really, really excited about Yusef coming into the young adult world. And YA is huge right now. It's been huge for a number of years. The success of novels like The Hate You Give and Dear Martin just lets us know that young people need to tell their own story, and then older people are listening to them. So that sort of perspective that Yusef has of having lived through something while he was a teenager was very necessary in my field, in my industry. So in that sense, I think it's just his experience in book form. When They See Us series is one way to get that sort of story out. But Yusef has a unique experience in that he's an artist, he's a poet, and he is very spiritual and wise and worldly in his understanding. But most importantly, I want young people to realize that Amal is very wise in the same way that Yusef was very wise, but that sort of thinking did not stop him from getting caught up in the system. We as parents like to prepare our kids to say, this is what the 13th Amendment is. This is, you know, this is how the prison industrial complex work. This is mass incarceration. This is racism. And just knowing that is not immunizing them from them experiencing it, right? I give my children, like I arm them with just cultural know-how, cultural worldview, but when they're going out into the world, they're still Black children. And when others who don't like them or don't want them to be in certain spaces see them, they're not going to know how smart they are or how talented they are. They're still going to get caught up. The idea is that what tools am I going to give them to make it through, to not internalize that, right? So Amal is not internalizing his experiencing. He is trying to get it out. And the way that he's getting it out is through art, is through words and poetry. And I truly believe this is what Yusef does. And this is what I do as an author too. I grew up in New York City absorbing all this violence that was happening. Yusef and I share that experience where we were thinking about the crime that happens in the book because it can't be his story. It has to be a different story. So we were like, wait a minute, you remember Yusef Hawkins? You remember Michael Griffith? You remember Bernard Goetz, the subway vigilante? And all these incidences are documentaries now. HBO just did Yusef Hawkins documentary. And I was like, oh, wow, I was in the 7th grade when this happened. And you would think New York City was in the South. So all of that to say, like, we were aware of all these things happening, but it didn't stop us from being, you know, caught up in just this racist incident, you know, in racist country. But we had art, we had hip hop, we had Public Enemy, we had KRS-One. You know, later on, I had neo soul. I had a different aesthetic to just articulate our rage. So when young people read this, know that you have the tools to be able to articulate your rage so that you get it out, you know, and you have the means in which to heal yourself by getting that out.
Yusef, if it was possible, you know, what do you think the 15 or 16-year-old you would take from Punching the Air, reading it in the prisons, reading it while you were in prison?
You know, one of the things that I loved about this book is that this book has these moments where we talk about the people who saw more in the individual going through this experience, right? And not just one individual going through this experience, but the multitude of the individuals going through this experience. You know, I think that giving them a real life person, me, but also giving them the multitude of the possibilities that anybody can pick up this book and experience this for themselves and say, man, I know someone who is like that. I went through that. You know, my uncle, my cousin, my brother, my mama, right? My grandmama, right? Because there's all of that. All the community is in there, you know, and I think the part that I think is important to get is that you're not crazy, and more importantly, you matter, right? You are a part of this wonderful expression of beingness that cannot be denied. We've all had to have that conversation, or have all had been given the conversation. You know, hey, when you go outside, this is what you need to do. Put your hands on the dash if you pulled over, all of that stuff. And it all doesn't give us immunity, because we still walk outside with this color of our skin. When they say drop the weapon, we can't ever drop the weapon. But we can't live life hiding in plain sight. We got to live life. We got to live full, as my good friend and mentor Les Brown would always say to me. Live full and die empty. Give it all. Give everything that you were supposed to give. Give it. But we can't. But the other part too is that there's sometimes this sense of I forget the exact word that they use, but it's about, it's like the reverse of privilege. I shouldn't say the reverse. It's on the same line as privilege, where you say to yourself, they should just give it to me.
Entitlement?
It is a part of entitlement, but the truth is that we, in our greatness, our birthright is knowing who we are, is knowing what we are, is knowing why we are, is knowing how we are. And because of time, we got to know where we are, right? Back in the days, there was this thing out, one of the hip hop hooks would say, do you know what time it is? Tell me, do you know? Do you really know what time it is? And that's the thing. Do we really know what time it is? Are we understanding the greatness of what Nipsey left with us, who just had his birthday, right? Who said, the marathon continues, right? How beautiful that is, that in the African concept of going somewhere, that if you want to go far, go together, right? As soon as you say, I'm out, you know, you're going to be burnt out. But there's so much that we can grab and gravitate. But I think the thing too is that just knowing psychosocially that you matter is what has to be transferred. Because then you don't live and move throughout your life like you're a mistake. You move throughout your life with purpose. You got a whistle in your step. You got pride in your walk. You're holding your head up because you know that you came from and are, right? You know. And that's what it's about, being, without being arrogant, you know, whatever. You can just exist in a way that doesn't necessarily, and this is the other part, we know that we may not necessarily wipe out completely white supremacy, white male dominance, but we can wipe it out in you. And you is what matters. And you can produce beauty in yourself and around your circles, right? Because the true battle has never been about us fighting against another, but the true battle has always been about fighting spiritual wickedness in high and low places.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Thank you both for, you know, the book. If you guys can just let us know where and how people can purchase Punching the Air?
Punching the Air is available wherever books are sold. We do hope that you support your local bookstores. If you know of any Black bookstores, they are around the country. Mahogany Books rides with us. They're out in DC. Mahogany, you could buy a signed copy actually at Mahogany Books. Yeah, get a copy for the people in your life that you care about. It's not just for young people, but please hand it to a young person. Teach it in your classroom. There is a teacher's guide. If you look at our social media handles, you could go to the website and get the educator's guide and ask the right questions and do some activities around the book. And yeah, we're excited. And you can pre-order it now.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. You can definitely pre-order it.
If this will be out September 1st, you could get it right away.
Yeah.
Amazing. We are all super excited about Punching the Air. Thank you so much for your time once again, and good luck with everything.
Thank you
so much, Selena.
Yes, indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Right.
Take care.